So what we want to do next is fetch these values back from our API. We know we've got some API endpoints we can use here. And what we want to do is go and get our values that are being returned from one of our API endpoints. And what we want to do here is, first of all, we need to make sure our API is actually started before we go ahead and do this. So I'm just going to cd into the API project in a separate session inside my terminal. And I'm just going to type in .NET Watch Run. And I'm doing this because I know my API was already stopped. Yours might already be running. But I'm going to go back to the client side now. And what we want to do here is inside our component did mount, this is a good place to go and get some data from an API. And what we do is we wait until the component's mounted, go and fetch some data, and then we call this set state to update the state, and this will cause a re-render and display the data from our API. Now when it comes to getting data or making HTTP requests, React doesn't come with anything natively to go ahead and do this. It's not like Angular, which comes with an HTTP client service that we can make use of. We need to make a decision about what we want to use. Now in JavaScript there is natively a fetch library that we can use, and this is quite capable of going out to our API and making an HTTP request. But this one feels a bit too low level for me, and it doesn't provide the same level of functionality that you would get from Angular's HTTP client service. So what I like to use is a library called Axios to help us make HTTP requests, and that's the one that we'll use in this particular case. And if we take a look for Axios and we go and take a look at their GitHub page, then basically if we scroll down to the bottom here, what they suggest is their credits. They say that Axios is heavily inspired by the HTTP service provided in Angular. And Axios is an effort to provide a standalone HTTP-like service for use outside of Angular. And that's probably the reason I quite like using Axios, is it provides a similar sort of functionality that I'm used to when I'm using Angular instead of React. And usefully, Axios also includes TypeScript definitions. So it's going to work out of the box with our React application, or our React and TypeScript application. So let's go ahead and install Axios, and I'm just going to open up the terminal window again. And we don't need to stop our client application to do this, so I'm just going to open up a new session in my terminal inside VS Code. And what we do need to make sure of is that we cd into our client application. We do not want to run an npm install at our solution level. Otherwise we're going to get an error, and we'll also end up creating a node_modules folder inside our reactivity solution folder, which we don't want or need. So inside the client app, I'm going to say npm install Axios and just press return. And once this is installed, we can go ahead and use it. So inside our app, now what I'm about to do next is not going to be how we continue to use Axios, but just for this simple example, I'm just going to import Axios directly inside my app component. So I'm going to import Axios from Axios, and then what I can do inside my component did mount is say axios.get, and then I can put in the address of my API. So it's going to be http localhost 5000/API/values, and Axios get method returns a promise, which means we can use a then statement to say what we want to do when we get this data back from the server. So I'm just going to say then, and Axios returns an Axios response. So I'll say then response, and inside this particular function what I want to do is say this, or in fact I'm just going to cut and paste list.setState, and instead of using our statically created values, what I can do is say values is response, and inside our response we get a data object that's going to contain what's returned from our API. Now we're actually getting strong typing from this, and that's because TypeScript is smart enough to know that what we get back from Axios is a type of Axios response. So TypeScript is able to infer the type that we're getting inside this particular response. So what we can do is say response.data is what's going to be inside our values. And also what we'll do, just so we can see what Axios returns from the API, we'll just do a console.log and we'll just log the response object as well. And if we go and take a look at our browser now, what we'll actually see is that we don't get any values back at all. And if we take a look at our console, there'll be a reason for this, and the reason is that HTTP request to list location from the origin of localhost 3000 has been blocked by CORS policy. And it tells us that no access control allow origin header is present on a requested resource. Now if we take a look at our network tab, and I'll just refresh this page, and I'll just take a look for the values request. This is the request that we're making to our API, and we can see in this preview that we do actually get our values back from the server. But our browser is protecting us from using this data that we're getting back from the server, because in the response there's no cross-origin resource sharing header available inside here. And in order for our browser to accept the data we're getting back from our server, then it has to have a response header from the server to allow localhost 3000 to receive data from our API running on localhost 5000. We didn't get this problem in Postman because Postman isn't running on a different domain. This is querying our API directly. But because our React application is running on a different domain, localhost 3000 is a different domain to localhost 5000, then we need to set up our API to return the CORS headers along with our request. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at that next and see how we can resolve this particular issue.